Good morning. It's great to be here. It's good to have you. It's good to be back after last week's hiatus due to the weather. So we're glad the weather cooperated a little bit more today so we could be here, so we could encourage each other, and so we could worship and glorify God. Last week we'd planned to talk about the cosmological argument as we're trying to focus this quarter on helping us believe that God exists. I sent it out via email, and if you'd like that and you didn't get it, let me know. We could send that out. But basically, the point of the cosmological argument is that every effect must have an adequate cause. You only get nothing from nothing in the natural world. And therefore, some being must have existed before the universe, immense as it is, came into existence. It makes no sense for us to say that something came from nothing without a supernatural element, because it just doesn't happen naturally. Today we want to move to a second argument that we might use to prove the existence of a supreme being, and that's often referred to as the teleological argument or teleology. And that might sound like a big word, but I think it's a pretty easy concept to see once we break it down here in just a minute. Essentially, this is what the teleological argument is, though. It's also been called the design argument or the fine-tuning argument. But in logical form, this is what it would look like. Teleology is about the study of evidences of design in nature. And so the goal of the argument is to suggest the evidence of design in the natural world suggests that there was a designer who had a purpose or function for the world. And so if the universe evinces purposeful design, there must have been a designer. That's the first leg of the teleological argument. The second leg is that the universe does evince purposeful design. And we're going to go through several things today to try to make that point. And thirdly, the conclusion is, therefore, because the universe evinces purposeful design, and because that demands a designer, therefore the universe must have had a designer. Therefore, the universe must have had a designer. Now, sometimes we might begin to think, well, is this really going to change anyone's mind? Is anybody really going to change their mind based upon some of the sermons here or the teachings that we've got going on as we try to use some scientific evidence as to why we can believe in God and some philosophical arguments? And if you question whether or not that can be accomplished, I would refer you to a book, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. This book's written by Antony Flew. Antony Flew in 1950 was an atheist who was writing atheist papers that were very widely distributed by the millions. He was very influential as a philosopher and as an atheist thinker. And just recently, in the past few years, he wrote this book, There Is a God. And one of the points that he makes in this book is that one of the arguments that caused him to change his mind is the teleological argument, the design argument. So I'd encourage you to read it, and I'd encourage you to realize that these arguments do have an impact on those who will honestly and openly think about it. Now, I want to start with an illustration that helps us, I believe, understand really what we're getting at with this argument. And I hope you don't think it to be too flippant, but it's an illustration that comes from a familiar movie, the movie Home Alone. Maybe some of you have seen it. You know what kind of happens in Home Alone? I watched it when I was a kid, and the cool thing about Home Alone is all the traps this kid sets, right? He's got this battle plan that he lays out. He's got you touch the doorknob, and the doorknob is super hot. He's got the icy steps. He's got ornaments and micro machine cars set down there on the floor so that when you step through the window, you cut a hole in your foot. He's got the nails on the steps and the tar to take the boots off to get them barefoot, right? He's got the pull string with the iron, and when you pull the string, there's not a light, there's an iron that you're pulling down into your face. He's got the paint cans, here's some of the scenes, right? You've got the hot handle, he burns his hand. You've got the string with the blowtorch as soon as he opens the door. You've got the icy steps so that he falls down the steps. You've got him barefoot, so now he's coming through the window, stepping on the micro machines. You've got him trying to go through the little doggy hole there and getting shot with a BB gun. You got the light, and then it pulls down the iron into his head. You've got the nail after he's got his boots pulled off with the tar, and he's stepping on it. You've got him with the glue, and then the fan with the feathers tied to the string there. You got the paint cans when he comes down the steps. He misses the first guy. He thinks that he's gotten away with it. He turns around, right, gets him. And then you've got the tarantula, which I think was just, near the end. Now here's the point of all this. As you look at all the various traps from Home Alone, you look at this home and it's booby-trapped all over the place. You've got all these pranks, all these traps. Is it reasonable to say that there must have been a mastermind behind it all? Think about that. You don't usually have tar and a nail sticking straight up in your steps. You don't usually have that much ice on your steps. Nobody puts, an iron tied to a light string in their laundry chute. You look at all of these details together, and as you put the scene together, there has to have been a mastermind who was behind it. And really, we know there was, because if you've seen the movie, it's Kevin McAllister. He's the mastermind. He's the one who's behind it all. And so we're even more impressed because there's a kid that did all this while he was home alone. And that's essentially what the teleological argument is. It's taking a look at the entire universe, though. Not just one house. We're taking a look at the entire universe. We're taking a look at the earth. We take a look at the human body. We take a look at the DNA in the human body. We take a look at all of these things that seem to have been so finely and perfectly tuned. And we're asking the question, is it logical to believe, as we see all of these things, that there is a mastermind behind it all? And I want to consider some of the evidence with you. The teleological argument is essentially a philosophical argument. It's based upon scientific facts, though. Scientific facts that, as we consider the body of those facts, causes us to ask that question. Could there be a God behind it? And so I want you to think about a few things. We're going to start with the universe. In the book, The Case for a Creator, which Lee Strobel wrote, and he interviewed a lot of scientists in writing that. It's kind of his writing style as he writes The Case for Christ, The Case for a Creator, other books as well. But this is Guillermo Gonzalez, who is a scientist, the author of The Privileged Planet. He says this: "We found that our exact location in the universe, in our galaxy, in our solar system, as well as such things as the size and rotation of the earth, the mass of the moon, the sun, and so forth, a whole range of factors conspire together in an amazing way to make Earth a habitable planet. The conclusion that he, as well as other people, have made about the earth is that these things don't seem to be coincidences. They don't seem to be luck." And that's what a lot of people believe who don't believe in a God. As they look at all of these things, they believe it's just luck. For example, Oxford scientist Richard Dawkins, who's probably one of the most famous atheists, he said, "The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." Richard Dawkins says, "I look at the earth, I see no design, no purpose, no evil, no good." In 1983, there was a physicist by the name of John Gibbon. He described life on our planet as Earth's lucky break. It's just lucky. We just got lucky that everything's so perfect. As a result of these atheistic beliefs, Carl Sagan, he once described Earth as a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. It's just a lonely speck. No God, there's no purpose. You just got lucky. Lee Strobel notes in The Case for a Creator, he says, some people think that life is just as easy as a soup mix. Just add water, and you get it. And people who think that, have been led to believe that, are very blind to the very complicated and amazing facts about our universe and our earth and our bodies and so much more. Life is not just a mere fluke. Life is not just a mere coincidence. It's not just a lucky break. And I wanted to point out a few things to you. For example, look at our galaxy. We're here in the Milky Way galaxy. We're just, again, this just little planet here in a huge galaxy. And as some people have noted, it's interesting that the galaxy we're in is the perfect galaxy for us to be in order to have life. This is what, in 20 Compelling Evidences that God Exists, this is what Boa and Bowman write. Not any old galaxy will do. Some galaxies are too close to one another or too close to another large galaxy so that the galaxies actually interfere gravitationally with each other. Galaxies that are too elliptical or too irregular also would have a difficult time sustaining a stable star system. Our galaxy is a nicely organized spiral. So we're in the right-shaped galaxy. We're a nicely organized spiral. It says how many galaxies might be the right size and shape and in the right kind of location. There's no one sure, but an estimate of 1 in every 1,000 is reasonable. And so here we are, we're in a galaxy which is 1 in every 1,000 galaxies that just happen to be the right shape, the right size, and we are in the right location. It also is true that in our galaxy, in our place in this galaxy, that we're in the right position, and our Earth and what we breathe here is the right composition. This is what is written in Case for Creator. In terms of habitability, I think we are in the best possible place. And that's because our location provides enough building blocks to yield in Earth while providing a low level of threats to life. I really can't come up with an example of another place in the galaxy, in the whole Milky Way. He says, I can't come up with another place that is as friendly to life as our location. Sometimes people claim you can be in any part of any galaxy. He says, well, I've studied other regions, spiral arms, galactic centers, globular clusters, edge of disk. No matter where it is, it's worse for life. I can't think of any better place than where we are. Our galaxy optimizes habitability because it provides safe zones. He goes on to say, galaxies have varying degrees of star formation where interstellar gases coalesce to form stars, star clusters, massive stars that blow up as supernova. Places with active star formation are very dangerous. We couldn't be there. We couldn't live in those places. Things are blowing up. Gases are changing. He says in our galaxy, those dangerous places are primarily in the spiral arms where there are also hazardous giant molecular clouds. Unfortunately, though, we happen to be situated safely between the Sagittarius and Perseus spiral arms. So we're in the right position in our galaxy. We also are protected by the right planets in our galaxy. Notice this as he goes on to say, more and more astronomers are learning how the other planets tie into the habitability of Earth. For example, George Weatherall of the Carnegie Institute showed in 1994 that Jupiter, which is huge, more than 300 times the mass of the Earth, acts as a shield to protect us from too many comet impacts. We're in the right place. Jupiter, a shield protecting the planet Earth. It actually deflects comets. It keeps many of them from coming into the inner solar system where they could collide with Earth, which would have life-extinguishing consequences. We're in the right place. We're protected by the right planets. It says, in addition, other planets in our inner solar system protect us from getting bombarded by asteroids from the asteroid belt. The asteroids are mostly between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, and our first line of defense is Mars, being at the edge of the asteroid belt. It takes a lot of hits for us. Venus does too. So here we are, we're in the right place, with the right planets, in the right galaxy. We could look at a lot of other things with regards to the universe, but many of those things indicate to us that these things just aren't coincidence. But let's think a little bit more about the Earth and the fine-tuning and design that we see in the Earth. If you take a look at this chart here, we're going to get into some specifics in just a moment, but it seems pretty clear that the Earth is very, very finely tuned. For example, we're just the right relationship from the sun. We're just the right distance away, and we're just at the right tilt. We'll get into that in a minute. We have just the right atmospheric conditions. We have the right gravitational pull. If gravity was a little bit stronger, we'd be squashed. If gravity was a lot weaker, we'd be floating off the earth. We have the perfect gravity. We have the perfect gas proportion so that we can breathe this air that we need called oxygen. We have just the right moon, which happens to be the right distance, the right size, and turns at the right rotation for us to live. We have the perfect crust and the perfect amounts of water on the earth for us to live. And so though we might see fine-tuning in our universe, I think if we look closer at our planet, we notice a few aspects which just seem too perfect to be considered coincidental here on our earth. For example, consider our Earth's crust, that we have just the right terrestrial crust. In the case for a crater, it says again, if Earth were smaller like Mars, it would cool down too quickly. So we have to be the right size. The bigger the planet, the higher the surface gravity. The less surface relief between the ocean basins and the mountains. The higher the surface gravity of a planet, the greater the pull of the gravity on the mountains. And the tendency of greater gravity would be toward creating a smooth sphere. Now think what would happen if our planet were a smooth sphere. The Earth has a lot of water in its crust. And the only reason we're not a water world right now is because we have continents and because we have mountains. If you were to smooth out all the land, water would be at a depth of 2 kilometers. You would have a water world. And what happens if we're in a water world? Well, we're a dead world. We have the right amount of land, the right amount of water, and we have the right amount of land standing outside of the water. Water, in rock-solid faith, it says this, it provides, but water is necessary, right? It provides this sort of natural heating and air conditioning system for the land areas of the earth. Temperature extremes would be much more erratic than they are were it not for the fact that approximately 4/5 of the earth is covered with water. In addition, humans and animals inhale oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. On the other hand, plants take in carbon dioxide. They give off oxygen. We depend upon the world of botany for our oxygen supply, and yet we often fail to realize that approximately 90% of our oxygen comes from microscopic plants in the seas. If our oceans were appreciably smaller, we would soon be out of air to breathe. We have just the right amount of water, just the right amount of microscopic plants in the water, producing just the right amount of oxygen for us to breathe, is what he's saying. We also just have the right atmosphere here on Earth. Case for a crater says a terrestrial planet must have a minimum mass to retain an atmosphere. You need an atmosphere for the free exchange of the chemicals of life and to protect inhabitants from cosmic radiation. You need an oxygen-rich atmosphere to support big-brain creatures like humans. Earth's atmosphere is 20% oxygen, just right it turns out, and the planet has to be a minimum size to keep the heat from its interior from being lost too quickly. And it's the heat from its radioactive decaying interior that drives the critically important mantle convection inside the Earth. We have just the right atmosphere, just the right oxygen. In this book, they talk about how we're also the right distance from the sun. All of these factors, all of these very finely tuned factors are important. Notice this. It says location, location, location. That's what your realtor says, right? The most basic requirement for a decent planet to support life is its location. And presumably, as one or more planets formed around a star, such planets could form at virtually any distance from that star, between the extremes of so close that it's pulled into the star, or so far away that it escapes the star's gravity. But the region around the star within which a planet must consistently orbit in order to sustain life, at least above the level of a microbe, is a very narrow band. For example, for our sun, that band is a region that's roughly 90 to 100 million miles from the sun. And Earth just happens to be about 93 million miles away. Case for a crater says the sun is highly stable as well. You've got to not only have the right distance, but it's got to be the right kind of star. And the sun is the right kind of star. Some are exploding too much. They're too unstable. The sun is highly stable, more so than most comparable stars. Its light output only varies by 0.1% over a full sunspot cycle, which is about 11 years. And that prevents wild climate swings on the Earth. It would take a star with the highly unusual properties of our sun. It has to have the right mass, the right light, the right composition, the right distance, the right orbit, the right galaxy, and the right location to nurture living organisms on a circling planet. And that makes our sun and our planet very rare indeed. Bert Thompson writes in Rock Solid Faith, which is a really good book, he says, the sun's interior temperature is estimated to be over 20 million degrees Celsius. And the Earth, however, is located exactly the correct distance from the sun to receive the proper amount of heat and radiation to sustain life as we know it. If the Earth were moved 10% closer to the sun, far too much heat and radiation would be absorbed. If the Earth were just 10% further from the sun, too little heat would be absorbed. Again, we're in the perfect place. Perfect distance from the sun. We also just happen to have the right moon so that life on Earth can exist. Earth benefits greatly from having a large moon. With all the planets in our solar system, all of the planets in our solar system, Earth is the only one to have such a large moon. And it turns out the moon is just the right size and distance away from the Earth to help stabilize Earth's orbit and to produce tidal effects that are significant but not destructive. Hattie was in Bible class on Wednesday night. She came out of Bible class, and in the car, way home, she said, Dad, did you know that the oceans are connected to the moon? I said, yeah. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I said, yeah, we learned that in Bible class. She was excited. But it's true. Our tides, our high tide, our low tide, it's all connected to our distance from the moon, which just happens to be just right. Take a look at this other quote. The Earth is poised some 240,000 miles from the moon, whose gravitational pull produces ocean tides. If the moon were moved closer to the Earth by just a fifth, the tides would be so enormous that twice a day they would reach 35 to 50 feet high over most of the Earth's surface. Nobody but surfers would like that. Tides serve an important role as well. You've got these tides, and what's one of their purposes? Well, they're flushing out nutrients from the continents to the oceans, which keeps them more nutrient rich than they otherwise would be. The lunar tides help keep large-scale ocean circulation going. And that's important because the oceans carry a lot of heat, which is necessary to keep the temperature of the higher latitudes relatively mild. We happen to have the right moon. It's just doing the right thing to, again, help make this a habitable planet. And our Earth happens to be just at the perfect tilt and rotates at just the perfect speed. Again, the case for Creator. The moon actually stabilizes the tilt of the Earth's axis. The tilt is responsible for our seasons. What would it be like here in Ohio if it was always summer? Some of you think that'd be great, but I'll tell you what it would do. It would burn everything up. What would it be like if it was always winter? Eventually it'd get too cold because we'd never get warmed up in the summer. We need the Earth to be tilted so that we can have seasons. In a very real way, the stability of our climate is attributable to the moon and the tilt of our Earth. Rock Solid Faith says this: what would happen if the rotation rate of the Earth were cut in half? Let's say we rotated at half the speed that we rotate now. Or what would happen if it were doubled, if it was double the speed? Well, if it were halved, the seasons would be doubled in their length, which would cause such harsh heat and cold over much of the Earth that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to grow enough food to feed the Earth's population. If the rotation rate were doubled, the length of each season would be cut in half, and it would be difficult or impossible to grow enough food to feed the Earth's population. Our seasons, our food cycles, they depend upon the rotation of the Earth and the length of the seasons that we have so we can produce those things. Well, let's think a little bit about the human body. And Jeff talked a little bit to us about this on Wednesday night, and I want to think a little bit about it with you in the time that we have left. If you just look at the human body, you take a look at all the systems in the human body, it is hard to believe that all of that just happened to come together. You know, you look at this item on planet Earth, humans, and I'm not even going to talk about animals today, because we could spend a lot of time just looking at a lot of different animals that seem to have been very specifically created for a very specific purpose. But if you just look at humans and look at our fine-tuned bodies, I think we can realize that if we weren't looking at a human and we saw some of these things, we would have to say it was designed, it was engineered. For example, the circulatory system, right? Think about a car engine. Your car engine uses gas, it uses oil to fuel the car. What do we think of when we see a car engine that is pumping gas and turning it into a vapor and is using oil for its purposes to keep everything lubricated? What do we think when we see that? Do we think it's just a fluke, that it all just happened to come together? Or do we think that it's designed? When I think of a car, I think of the inventors of the car. I think of people like Henry Ford. When I think of the genius of the motor car's engine. Why not think of God as we consider the human heart, which pumps about 6,000 pounds of blood through 10,000 arteries and veins within the body every 24 hours for 60 to 90 years? That's just a fluke. When you think of the nervous system, I think of a computer microchip. And when I think of a computer microchip, I think of all the information that goes through that central station of that computer microchip, and it sends and it receives signals. It's interesting that when we think of computer microchips, we think of people like Bill Gates. We think of Steve Jobs when we think of microprocessors and computers. But why not think of God as you consider the human brain? The microchip is designed, but the brain is just a fluke. When I think of a respiratory system, I might think a little bit of a nebulizer. When our daughter Hattie had asthma, she had a couple of asthma attacks where she was in ICU a couple of times and she had to be on a nebulizer, on a breathing machine. But basically that simple little nebulizer turned liquid medicines into a gaseous, breathable state. Is that designed or was it a fluke? Well, it was designed. But lungs use oxygen to feed blood cells. And we think that that's just coincidence? When I think of the digestive system, I think of plumbing. That's your plumbing. And when I think of plumbing in a house, I think somebody must have been pretty smart to have been able to hook all this plumbing together and to make it all empty out into your septic system out in the yard so that that gets properly disposed of. Is it just a chance that our body uses food and water for fuel and then converts it into a disposal waste? Think of your skeletal system. You've got the framing of a house, and I think of builders who build houses. Your skeletal system is your framing. It's your foundation, it's your studs, your trusses. Is that designed? Is it a fluke? When I think of your muscular system, I think that's kind of like armor. And there are people who build armor to protect you from bullets and in battle and from fights and being damaged. Your muscular system does that. It protects your bones. It protects your organs. Is that designed or is it a fluke? It's interesting. We look at a camera and we all want the best phone so we can have the very best camera, and yet no one can duplicate the human eye. We look at a camera, though, and we say that must have been designed. Somebody very smart must have put that together so we can take these pictures and these, all these beautiful colors. We see design, and this is the point, in all the operating systems involved in cars, involved in machinery, involved in houses. We see its design, and yet we see more advanced operating systems in the human body, and we say that's just chance. And we haven't even touched on things like animal, like the camel, the giraffe, the chameleon, the eel, the skunk, the bombardier beetle, the hummingbird, the kangaroo, so many more that have very unique design features, each and every one of them. Is this just chance? Take a look at all these things. This is all of our, and we're going to talk about DNA in a later lesson, by the way. That's our information lesson in a couple of weeks. But are all these factors a lucky break? The human body, our galaxy, being the right shape, the right size, the right position, the right composition, the right planets, the right age, the right mass, our planet having the right terrestrial crust, the right atmosphere so we can breathe, the right relationship to the sun, the right moon, so that our ocean waves are at the right tide, the right tilt. All those factors that are very finely and precisely tuned, that if changed just a little bit would end life. Are those things coincidences? Are they evidence of design? Well, let me give you a few scientific minds and quotes from them. Not all these people, by the way, are believers. But they all admit, whether believer or not, that they see that things are very finely tuned, very surprisingly so. Martin Rees, and all these people, you can read all the, my grandma used to call it all the alphabet soup behind their name. But these are very educated, very smart, very renowned people in their fields. Sir Martin Rees says, wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine tuning. This is from Robert Jastrow's book, God and the Astronomers, from a NASA astrogeologist, John O'Keefe. He said, we are, by astronomical standards, a pampered, cosseted, cherished group of creatures. Our Darwinian claim to have done it all ourselves is as ridiculous and as charming as a baby's brave efforts to stand on its own feet and refuse his mother's hand. If the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could never have come into existence. It is my view that these circumstances indicate the universe was created for man to live in. I quote some of these things as well because sometimes we think, well, scientists don't agree with the idea that we're created. There are some scientists who see fine-tuning, who see design. In fact, there's a lot more quotes in this book, if you ever happen to read it, from Antony Flew himself, from people like Einstein and other scientists that agree with what I'm going to quote to you here. A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology. A super intellect seems to be behind our physics, our chemistry, and our biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to be so overwhelming as to put this conclusion beyond question. The chance that higher forms have emerged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. That's Sir Fred Hoyle, one of his speeches. Michio Kaku is an atheist, very well-renowned theoretical physicist and futurist. He says it's shocking to find how many of the familiar constants of the universe lie within a very narrow band that makes life possible. If a single one of these, I underline this because this is how he views it. If a single one of these accidents were altered, stars would never form. The universe would fly apart. DNA would not exist. Life as we know it would be impossible. Earth would flip over, freeze, and so on. It was all just an accident to him, but he sees that, but it is very finely tuned. There's a very narrow band that makes life possible. He just doesn't come to the same conclusion about why it's there and why it's all happened. Stephen Hawking said, the remarkable fact is the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. I don't think Hawking was a believer, but he said, if some of you think that it might have been a God, then so be it. He could understand why you would come to that conclusion if you listen to what some of Stephen Hawking stated and wrote before he passed away recently. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features the universe has, he is hiding his head in the sand. The special features are surprising and unlikely. He works in the Clarendon Laboratory at the University of Oxford. This is Paul Davies, who's done had a lot more impressive statements on this. He says, there is for me powerful evidence there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. I'm not just saying that as a Christian. That's what I want you to see. I'm not just saying this because I blindly believe in the Bible and in God and I've just been brought up that way. These are scientific minds, some of the best in their fields, who can see that there is fine-tuning, there is design, there is evidence for some super intellect behind it all. Well, what they're coming up with It's no different than what we already see in Scripture, right? What we see from the psalmist, for example, in Psalm 19 was this: the heavens declare the glory of God. When we look at the heavens, we see the glory of God. You can't look at all those facts that we just looked at and how we are so perfectly placed and think, wow, what an amazing God. He says the firmament shows His handiwork. His handiwork. There's a designer behind it all, is what the psalmist was telling us. Day unto day utters speech. Night unto night reveals knowledge. The psalmist again would say in Psalm 8, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. When I look at your heavens, he says, when I'm looking at the universe, that's the word we would use today. He would have used the word heavens, but he says, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, that's what we've looked at today. The same thing that the psalmist looked at. The moon and the stars which you have set in place, and set in place so perfectly. What is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him. Isn't it amazing that as small as we are in this huge universe, the psalmist says, it's amazing you still care for us. How impressive. Psalm 139, he didn't just use evidence from the heavens or from the earth or from the moon or from the stars. He looked at his body. He says, you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. And I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and I'm one of them, and you're one of them. And he says, my soul knows it very well. Romans 1:20, this is how Paul referred to it. He says, since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen. What might that be? We must have had a very, very wise God to have put everything together the way that He did. He is omniscient. We must have had a very powerful God to have created this earth and these heavens in the way that He did. He is all powerful. He is omnipotent. And we have a God who must be far more vast than we are in our set location, in our time, and our place. He is omnipresent. He is everywhere. And Paul said, when you look at the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, and they are understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. You're without excuse when you look at this amazing revelation of God that He's given us in nature. What's the purpose of all this information? The purpose is simple. If you've been doubting and disbelieving in our awesome God and our Creator, then you need to stop. You need to process this information and realize that God is speaking to you through His universe. He's speaking to you as you contemplate our planet. He's speaking to you when you look at the moon. With every breath of oxygen you breathe, God is speaking. With every heartbeat, God is reminding you of just how powerful and awesome and wise He is. And all of these factors are not coincidences. We are not accidents. God created the world with a purpose. And man, small though we may be, are His most special creation, whom He loved and created for His purpose in this incredible universe. I want you to look at one last passage. It's in Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. And I want you to realize that if God created this earth with a purpose and you're part of it, then He created you for a purpose. He has a purpose for you and for me and for all of His creation. And Colossians chapter 1, I believe, makes that very clear to us. Verse 16 and 17 of Colossians 1. It says, everything in verse 16 was created by Him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and for Him. Are you living for God? Are you living for His Son, Christ Jesus, who died for you? this passage says that you've been created through Him and you've been created for Him. If you've been wondering what your purpose is here on this earth, then look no further than this passage. Paul will one day, after he finishes writing Colossians, he will not just reveal that you've been created for a purpose, but Jesus can give you purpose in this life. And if you're not living for Jesus, we invite you to make confession of our great God and of His amazing Son who was there at creation as well today. Confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Turn from your sins and your purposeless life and live for purpose, living for our Lord and Savior Jesus. You can start fresh today with new purpose and new focus in life if you'll come forward. While together we stand and while we sing.